Call this meeting to, call this meeting to order. Let the record reflect that we have 5 council members present. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 council members present. We think Lee's coming in and have not heard from Ms. Crawford or Mr. Garrett. I'll move straight to new business. This is a resolution for acceptance of dedication of real property, which is parcel M0020021, 1000 Highway 138. Mr. Probst, would you like to take this?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm happy that we're here to discuss this today. We have a very generous donation from Reliant Homes, MFT Land Investment specifically, that umbrella, for 123 acres to the city of Monroe. This has been in the city for about 14 years, and it's on the riverfront of Alcovy River. And essentially, after a while, we've been discussing potential uses out there, and we've been kind of dreaming of having an Alcovy River access point for some future park activities, for whether it be input or output of watercraft, things of that nature. And there's just so much that can go on this property for the city of Monroe long term over many, many years. Of course, it would take a lot of time and eventual money to build it to full fruition. But this is kind of a once in a generation or more kind of gift to the city of Monroe. And essentially, we've got a bunch of documents in order here, beginning with a resolution, ultimately ending up with a land donation agreement that we've worked out, that contains some easements and things like that. And the culmination of it is this very large gift to the city of Monroe. So that's why we're here to have this special meeting for this very special purpose.
Would you like to go ahead, Ross?
I was just gonna say that's awesome. I think that's amazing.
It is very exciting. Would you like me to go ahead and read the resolution before we get into further discussion? How about this? I'm going to go ahead and read the resolution before we get into further discussion.
For it.
So this is the resolution of the mayor and council of the city of Monroe regarding the 123.70 acres of real property donation located on Highway 138 from MFT Land Investment LLC. Whereas the city of Monroe, Georgia, the city has been vested with substantial power to regulate the use of property within the city for the purposes of maintaining the health, morals, safety, security, peace, and general welfare of the city. And whereas the city has the legislative power to adopt reasonable resolutions or regulations relating to property within the city for which no provision has been made by general law and which are not inconsistent with the Constitution of the state of Georgia or any charter provision applicable thereto. And whereas MFT Land Investment LLC, the donor, desires to donate the real property commonly known as 1000 Highway 138, Monroe, Walton County, Georgia 30655, more particularly described by Exhibit A attached hereto, comprising of approximately 123.70 acres, more or less, the property, the donation to the city. And whereas the city desires to accept the donation from the donor, and whereas the city desires to enter into a land donation agreement, the agreement with donor, and whereas the city desires to provide donor with its acknowledgement of the donation for tax purposes, and whereas the mayor and city council have determined that it is in the best interest, general welfare, and growth of the city to accept the donation and enter into the agreement, and whereas all stated goals of this resolution are incorporated fully herein, now therefore be it resolved that the mayor and city council of Monroe do hereby accept the donation of property as follows. The preamble of this resolution shall be considered to be and is hereby incorporated by reference as if fully set out herein. 2, the city hereby accepts the donation from donor on this date. 3, the city shall acknowledge the donation of donor on IRS Form 8283 prepared by donor and approved by the city attorney. 4, the city shall execute the agreement on this date. 5, the mayor and city administrator are authorized to execute the agreement, the IRS Form 8283, and any other documents deemed reasonably necessary to effect the intent of this resolution and cause the property to be received by the city. So resolved this 21st day of December 2020, City of Monroe, Georgia, and I'll approve this, and it will be attested by Ms. Kirk. Could I have a motion, and then we can have some discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion to adopt the resolution and accept the donation.
Have a motion by Mr. David Dickinson. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Welcome, Lee. I think that's Lee's voice, right?
It is.
It is. I'm having internet problems.
Thank you, Lee. Welcome. Is there any discussion?
Well, I'd like to just make a comment on it, I guess. Recently, the owner of this property requested a rezone of the property with a proposed development. The city then arranged for 2 public hearings on the request. It was heard by Planning and Zoning with a recommendation for approval by the staff. Planning and Zoning sent a request to the City Council with a recommendation of approval. City Council heard the request and was given a presentation on the proposed development. I was really impressed with the proposed development and felt it'd be an asset to Monroe, Walton County, and its region. In answering a question from the council member, the representative owner said it would probably be a couple of years before starting the development. The council easily approved this rezone with the development as presented. Within hours following the council vote, the owner offered the property to the city as a gift with no strings attached. Unfortunately, with this in mind, the actions taken by the city could possibly be viewed as actions taken to artificially increase the property value in exchange for a valuable gift. When I was elected to the council, I made a promise to myself that as long as I served on the council, I would not take any actions or vote in such a way that would be illegal, unethical, or inappropriate, or give the appearance of such. For the past 9 years, I've striven to uphold that promise. As a result, I will vote no on this motion. I do that without regard to the pros or cons of the city owning this property. I do want to emphasize that my comments or vote are not to be construed as an accusation of wrongdoing by anyone associated with this action. I understand that some members of the council disagree with my thoughts here, and I respect their opinion. I just hope you'll also respect mine.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Are there any other questions or comments?
I was just curious about the easement from my own understanding, as far as the part that runs up to the river. That's my understanding, that that part of the river access runs up to another parcel of property. Is that correct?
So the issue with easements is there is an old existing easement on the property from an old roadbed that probably predated even the ownership of this property by the current owners. Additionally, it addresses the reality that there is an old historic bridge, the old Selman Mill Bridge is on this property. And there's a lot of fine tuning of the details of abandoning that existing easement, addressing the maintenance of this bridge, addressing some access. But the short version of it is, Mr. Gregory, is this, is number one, there's still some minutia of details to work out, but there is an adjoining parcel owned by a related entity of the donor. And the basics of their request or their plan is that there be some sort of pedestrian / golf cart access over that bridge in the future, assuming that the soon-to-be city parcel builds out in a passive park format as is envisioned. So basically, it's just taking the next 90 days and working with the donors group and with staff and nailing down the specifics of what those easements would look like. There'll have to be an abandonment of the existing easement and the creation of a few more new documents outlining what the easements look like going forward. But generally, if I hope I'm answering your question, any of those documents, any of those easements would not in any way negatively impact sort of this long-term concept vision of it being a passive park use for the city, even including this idea of being able to have a drop-in or drop-out location off of the Alcovy River.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Mr. Rosenthal. What's the status of the old Selman Bridge Road that goes in there next to Rowell Drive? It's like a gravel street. Is that a city street?
No, from the title work that I have seen, if it's the path that I think you're referring to.
Yeah, it goes down to a gate. There's a couple of houses back there before you get to it, and then it goes down to a gate where it's closed off right now.
Yeah, that's the parcel. That's the area that has this existing ingress egress easement across it that we've got to deal with abandoning. And it appears from I don't think there's any governmental ownership of any of that anymore. It appears that the neighboring parcel, which is owned by a related entity of the donor, has ingress egress rights over that roadbed, and that's what we've got to flesh out and work through.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And
the bridge is a part of on the property. Is it considered on?
Yes, sir. It touches both this property. It traverses, of course, Alcovy River and touches the neighboring property, and the property line of the legal description, which is very common, of course, is the center line of the waterway. So the ownership, maintenance, and access and use and rights to the bridge, we've got to work through.
Well, is it joint with the other property owner?
Well, as it sits here today, accepting this deed, accepting this limited warranty deed of gift, yes, we would own to the center line of the river, which would include our ownership of half of the bridge.
That bridge is very old and in very bad shape, right?
That my understanding is that's correct.
Part of it has been
Iron Bridge, yeah.
The past few years.
I'm sorry.
It has been redone over the past few years. But yeah, it would require ongoing maintenance if we were to decide to keep that portion of it, or we can later decide to not keep that portion of the bridge, but continue some easement access at the bridge.
Are there any other
Nowhere
questions?
for us. If we incorporate that bridge and it's a part of a park, there's nowhere you go across it. There's nowhere, we don't own the land on the other side.
That's
right?
correct.
Correct.
And I think the roadbed has been completely obliterated from the other side of the bridge.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments? Any questions?
Oh, one other comment I want to make about the question of when a government entity or a nonprofit accepts a donation like this. I just want to make sure everybody understands that the donee of the property, be it a government or a nonprofit, makes no certification whatsoever to the Internal Revenue Service about the value of the property. That is, there's no number on that form that the donee signs. We're just saying, if we take it, we're just saying we accept it. It is between the donor and the Internal Revenue Service to come up with what is the fair market value of that property. And my understanding is that until you get up to $500,000, the donor doesn't even have to give the IRS an appraisal. But once you get to $500,000, I think a formal appraisal is required. But that's solely between the donor and the IRS as to what the value is. Correct, Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, sir. The form that is referenced in the resolution is part of the documentation you refer relating to the IRS, but all that we would be signing is a document acknowledging two things. One, acknowledging receipt of the item, whatever it may be, whether it's real property or something else, that we have received the donation, and then certifying too that if we were to sell it within a 3-year period after date of receipt, that we would file an additional required form. Those are the only two things that we will be certifying: that we've received the donation, received ownership of the 123 acres, and that we acknowledge it if we sell it within 3 years of the date of gift or donation, that we would have to file additional forms with the IRS. Those are the only two things that we will be certifying to.
Mr. Rosenthal, is there a way to put that property in conservation or some similar function that would allow us to make sure it's preserved as green space from now until forever?
Well, that is an interesting query. I would be happy to look into it for you, but y'all are the ones who will dictate whether or not it's green space or not for the foreseeable future. Whether or not a governmental entity could put a negative easement or impair the use of dirt through a land trust, through a conservation land trust or not, I honestly cannot answer that question without digging into it for you, but I'll be happy to look into it. But normally that's happening between land trust and private entities or individuals that are using tax benefits and credits and the like, but it certainly may be possible, and I'll be happy to look into that for you if you would like me to.
Gotcha.
Well, and I would think that just by the very nature of this park, I mean, you're talking about a tract of land that's over 4 times the size of our next largest park. And it borders on a stream where you've got restrictions about what sorts of things can be placed there. I would just think this is the perfect green space park that's for people who want to use the river, kayakers, canoers, that sort of thing. People that want to have a running trail that's really some distance, mountain biking trail, that kind of thing. I don't think this will be a park that has the kind of development that we have in a smaller park.
One thing that I'll say to that, Mr. Bradley, on your query is we can certainly look into it. One sort of low-hanging fruit that I can think of, I know that this council's had discussions about potentially looking at financing for parks through various bond mechanisms and methods. And those sort of mechanisms would have restrictions, meaning if a bond is obtained from the city to improve a park, then that park's going to have to remain for that purpose. So that's one sort of backdoor way to address what you're asking. But we'll look into the issue. But obviously, Mr. Dickinson is right. This is a really big, pretty piece of land that doesn't have any real renovations or development on it. So it's pretty green and sounds like it'd be a good use long-term for a passive park.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure, I guess it's protected 100 years from now.
I did want to note too that, you know, talking about our development patterns and how it fits into what you've been talking about in your most recent planning retreats and whatnot, this can also provide a great green space buffer on our western periphery, you know, where we kind of draw the boundary line of, you know, urban growth out to a little bit more rural residential areas. So it really fits in nicely with what you guys have been trying to sculpt as far as the city maps go.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a follow-up kind of to Mr. Little's question, I was wondering about the bridge, and if we own half of it, what does that mean for us as a city? Do we have to maintain it, or, you know, what does that look like?
Well, that's the purpose of this 90-day window here, Mr. Gregory, to give us some time to work with the donor to flesh out those details, because all of the points that Councilmember Little raises are very relevant and accurate, that there's not a lot of reason for us to connect across, but the affiliated entity of the donor will have some reason and need and value to connect back to the park. So we can work through those details with the donor's team and get a good mechanism in place that will limit the city's exposure to, you know, having to build a bridge to nowhere. We're not looking to get into building bridges to nowhere and those sort of things, but we'll work through all that over the next 90 days.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have anything else?
Last question.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Rosenthal, that 90-day period, and I think I already know the answer to this, but, or I guess whenever the terms are concluded in that 90-day period, is that something that we'll be aware of prior to it being executed?
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Take that back. I'm sorry. If you would raise your hands, and I heard Lee's voice. So we have David, Tyler, Ross, and Nathan, and Lee, and all opposed, like sign. And Larry's opposed.
Mr. Mayor, also point of order. I believe Myosha is on the call as well.
I think she's muted.
Myosha, I don't know how we would see.
Well, I do think it's important. Let's do, Mayor, if I can interject, Mayor, let's get a roll call on this vote, please, since we're having some technical difficulties and we're on Zoom. It's our first Zoom meeting in a moment. So I think this would be best if we could roll call this vote so that you can have an accurate reflection.
More than happy. Larry Bradley.
No.
Ross Bradley.
Yes.
David Dickinson.
Yes.
Nathan Little. Nathan Little.
Yes.
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 Myosha Crawford.
Yes.
Thank you, Myosha. Glad you're here. Lee Malcolm.
Yes.
Tyler Gregory.
Yes.
And just in case, Norman Garrett. So the ayes have it, 6 yeses to 1 no, motion passes. And I appreciate all of your time being here. I wanted to say, I've been talking with Daryl McWaters a little bit over the last few weeks. Daryl McWaters and Reliant Builders are the group behind this donation, and how much I appreciate them and their belief in us and you as a council, and belief in the direction the city's headed. And I could not be happier than I am right now for the city of Monroe. This is a tremendous long-term benefit. That being said, I need a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Senator Ross?
Yes, sir.
And a second?
Second.
Who was that? Nathan Little, second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That passes. Meeting adjourned. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.